Hi, Misha here, and thanks to some recent surplus guns on the market, I really felt like revisiting Walthers. Did a PPK video, not sure if that'll come out before or after this one, and we'll do another deep dive for the P38 and P1 series, the police guns, but doing this shorter video to answer a very direct question that Scott079 asked in our black box video. He said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, recent companies are selling post-war guns as P38s, and don't I find this deceptive? Kind of bad marketing. And my response, no, not at all. And I want to explain why. So for that, in this particular video, I brought out just a good example piece of a wartime AC-43, an example piece of a Bundeswehr P1, because I want to explain the differences and the naming conventions, the designations that Karl, Walther, and Ulm, Germany used themselves in the post-war era. So this will be a short video, hopefully, and next time we'll dive in to the wartime and post-war guns, because honest to God, these are just some of my favorite guns to talk about, and maybe after listening to me for a while, yeah, you might enjoy them too. After all, Lugers get all the glory, but man, the P38 was just ahead of its time. And if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to help support us, there's Patreon. Also, we started doing live streaming in a very amateur way, but we're having a lot of fun at it, so check that out too. And if you ask a particularly interesting question in comments, maybe I'll do a video directly addressing you. But this time, this video, it's for Scott. Alrighty, so this one was made in 1943 for the German military under the Nazi regime. And this one was made in the middle of the Cold War for West Germany's army, the Bundeswehr. Both are Walther marked, but are very different. Now this is clearly a P1. This is clearly a P38. But it's not always that simple. So the P38s, like I said, in another video we'll go into the history, but the very earliest ones appeared at the end of 1938 as the HP, the Here's pistol. That was the commercial name. And they would start to receive prototypes in the German military in 1939, and the early prototypes known as the Zero series would be delivered through early 1940, and by April of that year an actual contract would be issued, and transitioning from Luger production to P38 production would occur. However, the HP name would actually continue to be used for commercial guns sold within Germany and without Germany, namely to Sweden and Austria, until mid-late war, when all production would end up going to the German military. So even these guns aren't always P38s. Some of them are technically HPs. So what makes an HP? This gun was designed to be cheaper and easier and faster to mass produce than the Luger, the P08, and it would be about 3/4 the cost, but it was also the first commercially viable full production single double action military gun, complete with decocker safety, which made it safe to carry with one in the chamber, even with a firing pin safety of sorts. It fired the standard 9x19 parabellum Luger round, 9mm, had a 4.9-inch barrel, overall length of about 8.5 inches. It used a falling wedge locking system, and so while the barrel had some movement, it was just in a horizontal plane. This actually gave very good reliability, accuracy. Also with better reliability was this totally open top slide system with a pretty prominent extractor on the side. We also have a loaded chamber indicator. Like I said, a pretty advanced gun for that damn time. It also had a last round hold open with external release, something the Luger did not have. And finally, it fed from 8-round detaching single stack magazines with a heel release, and had wraparound grips, synthetic, although some commercial guns and early production guns had wood grips, but different types of Bakelite and even plastic, even metal sometimes, were common. Advanced gun. It had a steel frame and steel slide, single piece steel barrel, although it was quite advanced in the sense that it had some stampings, like here on the top, and some late war guns even had stamped parts like the slide release. But generally speaking, overall weight was 34 ounces. So, just over 2 pounds. That would, of course, be unloaded. These would be produced by 3 factories during the war: Walther in Zella-Mehlis, Mauser, Oberndorf, and Spreewerk in occupied Czechoslovakia. The codes would be AC, BYF or SVW, and CYQ respectively. And there would be subcontractors, for example, Brunn, as the Germans called it, which we know today as CZ, and FN Herstal would make some parts, and there would be magazine subcontractors, but these would not actually make full guns. That gives you that. Production for the wartime would end in May of 1945. Essentially, the factories would stop making them when the Allies would occupy them. The Russians would take over Spreewerk, and the Allies would occupy Mauser and Walther. That would end production. And right after the war, guns like this so-called Grey Ghost would be made. France would build tens of thousands in the occupied Mauser factory up until 1946, when the Russians would complain. But also in the occupied Czech Republic, or excuse me, Czechoslovakia, they would actually build a few guns from the former Spreewerk plant as well. So there would be small production up until 1946, but then from that time until 1957, no new P-38 types would be built, which gets us to this gun. Fritz Walther, one of the 3 sons of Karl Walther, would be one of the 2 primary designers of the P-38, and after the war, he would find that the original factory in Zella-Mehlis would be under the Soviet zone of occupation. Therefore, he would establish a new factory in Ulm, Germany, a very nice town. I've been there years ago. And at first, he would make business machines because West Germany, as it would become known as the Allied zones would unify around 1949, was not allowed to make guns and didn't even really have a standing army. But that would all be changing by the 1950s. In 1955, it was allowed for Germany to start making arms again and to form the army, the Bundeswehr. In 1956, Fritz Walther, the new Walther factory, would begin tooling up because the Bundeswehr's first sidearm would be the Pistol 1, the P1, which was essentially a P-38. So this would be the first year this designation would appear on paper, and the production line would tool up, and by June of 1957, the very first guns would start to be delivered. But they would not be marked P1. They would actually be marked P-38. These guns would be very, very similar to wartime guns in their operations, but have some improvements. When Walther himself left, he took with him blueprints, design drawings, and everything else. Plus, he helped design it, as I said. So, yeah. Now, one thing they had worked on during World War II was an aluminum alloy frame, a Dural frame. And they successfully made PPKs with this frame. And they tested P-38s, but they were not successful. They could not make it strong enough to withstand the battering of 9x19, so it really went nowhere. This was revisited in the post-war era, and by 1958, at the latest, they had the mix right, and so alloy frames were the name of the game. They also would go to a new pattern of grip, which was actually a take on the original P grip checkering, and it was lighter and more durable than the Bakelite of the era. Fun fact, actually, the very first generations had metal grips, not dissimilar to the Grey Ghost, but these were quickly done away with. And a few other changes would happen. For example, the barrel would be a two-piece design, still called hammer-forged chrome lined, but it would be a two-piece lined design. They would improve the safety system. And in fact, the whole thing would change during its production run, but we're not going to get into that for this video. Mechanically, it's the same system. Double, single action, decocker. Same locking system. Release, even the same magazines. But this is noticeably lighter. The first generation were 27 ounces, and later they would creep up to about 28 ounces because of some improvements and reinforcements that we'll talk about in the longer video. So, why do I not think that calling these guns P38s is deceptive? Because I understand where he's coming from, but it can't be argued because that's what Walther called them. While P1 existed on paper as early as 1956, the guns made for the Bundeswehr were actually marked P38. They were just P1 on paper. That is until 1962. Eventually, yes, the name P1 would appear on the Bundeswehr guns. But P38 would continue to be stamped on guns destined for police, border security agencies, at least some of the time, if they didn't get surplus Bundeswehr guns, and commercial guns. This means, while many were marked P1, many others leaving the factory, especially ones exported to the U.S., imported by Interarms, were actually still marked P38. And this would continue through the 1990s. So that's the name used. So how to tell them apart? Well, in my mind, your wartime era guns, your steel frame guns, are marked P.38 or P-38. Post-war, there's no period, no dash. This is a general rule of thumb. So, yeah. Now, I will say that while most guns made in this era were alloy frame, from time to time, Carl Walther would do small series of steel frame guns, typically as commemoratives and what have you. Also, it seems like maybe some of the very first ones made could have had steel frames. I'm not sure. I've read contradictory things on that, so please forgive me. But I can confirm that, yeah, the guns made for police and civilians, commercial sales, were still P38. Because to their mind, this was just a P38. And it is. It's just a lightweight P38. Just like a Dural lightweight PPK is still a PPK. So, to not get swindled, you just kind of have to know the markings. Like I said, your wartime guns will usually have a 2-digit year code, be marked AC, BYF, SVW, CYQ. They'll have Waffen amps. You could also find some wartime era guns with HP markings, although those are far less common. Post-war, you'll of course see West Germany. You'll see Ulm. You'll have a Walther banner, some of the time at least. No Waffen amps. You'll have the modern black grips, or you could have commercial wood grips. I should also say that commercial guns had a higher polished blued finish, whereas the military guns had a more sandblasted blued finish on the barrel and the slide. Of course, the alloy frame was anodized black, and guns that had gone through military refurbishment could have more of a matte phosphating parkerizing to the top part as well. You'll see quite a few things like that. And again, there were several changes to the design to improve it. Then again, during the wartime, they made several changes as well. In fact, a couple of them to the exact same area. And the magazines themselves are clearly marked Carl Walther Ulm, whereas your wartime mags, for the most part, have the P.38 markings and codes. And there will be fewer serial numbers on your post-war guns, for what it's worth. As to total production numbers, roughly 1.2 million P-38s were made during the war, again with a few more made immediately post-war, typically with leftover parts. As for your post-war P1 P-38s, these are all made at Carl Walther. Well, with one exception we'll talk about that came from France. And they built roughly 600,000. The bulk would go to the Bundeswehr, but still, quite a large number would go to other areas. The last Bundeswehr contract guns were in 1992, and they started to be actually phased out in the German military in 1994. And it seems like the final runs, which were increasingly of smaller and smaller batches, were done at Carl Walther, with the last commemorative guns done in 2004. And they typically will have a date code, month/year on them. The codes on the wartime guns, you'll have a 2-digit year code, but to get a month, you have to look more at the serial number. So, yeah. I just wanted to address that in a relatively quick video, quick for me anyway, but for more detail, I'll do something coming out very soon. But no, I don't think it's duplicitous, only because that's what Carl Walther themselves chose to name these. Heck, the P4s used by the police were even known as the P38 4, Roman numeral 4, when they were exported to the US for commercial sales, again by Interarms here. So it's just something they kind of stuck along with. To their minds, they were essentially the same gun. And I will say, quality-wise, they're very good guns. In fact, P1s or post-war P38s have always been a really good value for what you get, the quality. But that's just my opinion. That's my reason why. Feel free to disagree. That's okay. I'm just kind of giving my aspect. But either way, appreciate you hanging out. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. Help us on Patreon. Come into the next live stream. Feel free to ask questions. And like I said at the beginning, if you ask an interesting one that's enough worth making a video over, maybe I'll do this. So, Scott, I hope that at least explained my point of view. Again, if you still disagree, completely respect that. That's just what opinions are for. This is Misha. Catch you very soon with more Walthers next time.